Good evening, everybody. This is Marty from Dawgs blog with tonight's podcast on the Frank Carson et al. Trial. This is December 11, 2018. More of the same kind of this afternoon. Still got Quintanar on the stand, and the defense redirect our cross-examination on Quintanar was pretty brief. To the point, but pretty brief. But Marlisa started it all over again. I think she's really having a good time with this. So, in redirect. So, the jury was up around 1:35. The judge was on the bench at 1:37. So we didn't do too bad. Better than this morning. We actually got some good jury time in the courtroom today. I totaled it up around 210 minutes. So we had about a good 3.5 hours throughout the day of good jury time today in the courtroom. That is the exception, unfortunately, not the norm, what's going on in this screwed up case. Hans was doing cross on Quintanar, talking about the wiretap on July 15th. And he talked about when he was asking him, if they gave him the fifth, if he signed anything as far as a right to remain silent and all that stuff. And he was talking about the CH policies and respect the constitutional rights of all, whether they're and he also mentioned that whether they're citizens or not, they have a right to be treated a certain way. He never told Dawgs Atwell to not talk, and just asked about if his rights were read. Talking about the MFer on the Carson property that is still missing, that they're looking for by the DA's DA's office. Never told what they were asking. Hans asked him if he was privy to what Kurt Bunch had talked to him about, what he had said, what Dawgs Atwell said, Dawgs had a 5 or 6 hour interview, but he never knew, Quintanar never knew anything that was discussed in that interview, and didn't know anything whatsoever, didn't really have any information. He was just, like he said, he was just trying to find out what was going on. He did admit sometimes Dawgs Atwell can be difficult to understand. He does speak broken English. And Quintanar said he was starting to distance himself from Poppencork. He didn't care if they were guilty or not. He just stayed away. He was told to stay away at one point, and he just thought it was a good idea altogether because some of the things that were going on. The Atwell brothers always claimed innocence to anybody they ever talked to, including Quintanar. Jago Hill took over Cross, and said he was 13 years in law enforcement. He was subpoenaed by the district attorney's office and asked questions for 5 days. Quintanar's testimony, he admits he does not have any personal knowledge of what happened to Corey Kaufman. He's claimed it all along, and nobody's ever indicated that he did. Quintanar, he was questioned in regard to CHP policies, and with his interview with the Internal Affairs, it involved a lot to do with the wiretaps that were done in July of 2012. There was others, but mostly Marlisa Ferrer was concentrating on July 9th, the 12th, and 15th, if I remember the dates right. On the 9th conversation, again, they were talking about someone might be trying to rob the Atwells. He was concerned about being followed. And he had talked to Quintanar, as Dawgs Atwell talked to Quintanar, as he had talked to several other police officers about it at Turlock Police Department. No one had any idea it was law enforcement officers in the car, other than law enforcement officers, of course. It was actually Kurt Bunch and Frank Navarro were heavily involved in that. Quintanar thought Dawgs Atwell had been talking to a private detective. He really wasn't sure who it was. Dawgs doesn't really understand some of the things that were going on apparently, and thought somebody was a private detective instead of police officers in some of these visits to the popping cork. And again, he was concerned about somebody following him and robbing him after he closed the store down, because he closed the store down at midnight during the week and sometimes 2 a.m. on the weekends. They stayed open later. Daljeet Atwell did contact some Turlock Police Department officers. It is still unknown if Daljeet had been talking to law enforcement officers or private investigators, as we just said. Again, he talked about Daljeet at times has trouble understanding and speaking English. Marlisa Ferrer, this is Jai Gohel asking Eddie Quintanar. Marlisa Ferrer was asking about saying they think you did something, which was a comment that was made in that wiretap on the 15th, that they thought that the Atwells had done something. Obviously, they're doing a search warrant there. And Daljeet Atwell said, me, he gave an answer of me, and Quintanar said, yeah, do they think you did something? Daljeet Atwell said, I didn't do anything, brother. And he wasn't asked how Daljeet Atwell responded to anything else. On 7/15/12 call, there had been information that Bobby and Daljeet Atwell, there had been no information that they had done anything wrong. The search warrant created an awkward situation for Quintanar, as they were good friends, but he was a police officer. Quintanar had some familiarity, of course, with law enforcement activities and search warrants, but even though he said he'd never actually done a search warrant himself, written one that is. But Quintanar felt he better distance himself somewhat because of the issues involved, and he got in a little bit of trouble with the guns being over there. And but again, he says that doesn't indicate any guilt by the Atwells. He was told by in an interview in October of 2012 that he needed to stay away from the Atwells as directed by CHP Command. He felt that he was not able to refuse an interview with the CHP investigators on the internal affairs investigation. He said Kurt Bunch was involved in a criminal investigation, who, as a CHP officer, is still protected by the Constitution and had no obligation to talk to investigators. He has that right to do that. Just because you're a police officer, you're not giving up your constitutional rights to not talk about a criminal case that they're telling you they're going to arrest you on and things like that. On August 14th of 2015, when Quintanar was taken into custody, he did assert his Fifth Amendment rights, as Kurt Bunch was there, but he was actually, I believe it was Frank Navarro that wanted to interview him, and he invoked his right to remain silent. He was arrested by Kurt Bunch, and Kurt Bunch told him he's going to be charged with a homicide, as Kurt Bunch is not letting that one go, and he's just trying to shake a tree and tickle the wire, as they call it, and see what falls out. Jai Gohel asked Quintanar if Kurt Bunch scared him when he took him into custody because he's afraid he'd get charged with homicide. He said, yeah, I sure was. And he was asked if he still feels that way. He said, yeah, I do. It could still happen. He was asked about information that was to an allied agency that either giving information to or getting information from or being interviewed by an allied agency. He has to report that to his superiors. That's what he did. He did what he's supposed to do. He had no information on the case. He said that repeatedly, and he's saying that still today. They had also, and when that last question was asked about the Daljeet Atwal asking about the carry concealed weapon and in a business, you don't need a concealed weapon to carry carry a weapon in a business, in your home. He had every right. Daljeet Atwal had every right to carry a concealed weapon in his business, in his home. You just can't do it out in public, and you can't run around in a car with it. There was major some objections by the district attorney on some of these questions, and this one ended up in a sidebar. CHP had also terminated him. They had also taken buccal swabs from Quintanar, as they did all the defendants when they were arrested. Now, buccal swabs, if you're not familiar, is what they take. It's a cheek swab they take for DNA samples. And apparently they can take them anytime anybody's taken into custody. They have a right to invade your body like that. So that, gave them some concern, of course. They're obviously looking at him as part of this homicide. That's the only reason they would do that. There was a question about law enforcement and popping cork and people hanging out. There was officers drinking, but he was never aware of any on-duty officers drinking. There was just officers off-duty drinking. He saw 2 Glocks under the counter at Poppin' Cork. Liquor stores typically are targets to get robbed, especially late at night. Like this one is open late. Poppin' Cork closed at 2 a.m. on the weekends. And many officers were there day and night throughout the day, on and off duty. Jai Gohil asked him about Marlisa Ferrer, asking about the side lot at Poppin' Cork, and asked him if he ever smelled the odor of decomposition and that side lot at Poppin' Cork. He said he never had. He asked about honor code, the CHP honor code, or as a law enforcement officer, there's an honor code that's put out by Post. Now, Post is a police officer standards and training. They have their code of ethics that they're taught at the academy. Post Police Officer Standing Training is the oversight agency that sets the training and oversees police officers getting their proper training and evaluations, and they set the standards for the academies and so on. That's the legislating agency in California, is Post. And he talked about the Post standards of code of ethics, and they apply to all law enforcement officers. And Jai Gohil asked him, well, does that mean it applies to Kurt Bunch too? And he said, yes, it does. It applies to all law enforcement officers. They have a code of honor that has to be done, ethics that have to be abided by. And in addition, he also has his constitutional rights. Kurt Bunch has the same constitutional rights that Eddie Quintanar has. They were talking about the text to Officer Fuentes, and he had talked to his union rep, Mark Frost, about this. And he had talked to a DA investigator, talked about the DA investigators harassing him and his family. And what really made it worse is that they went, while Quintanar was at work, which they knew that he was at work, they went to his house and harassed his wife and his young daughter. They also went to his mother-in-law's work and tried to talk to her and do some things. I don't know exactly what happened while the mother-in-law has worked. Guess who she worked for? She worked as a secretary for one of the board of supervisors. Now, if these people had any balls, they'd be doing something about this, but it doesn't appear they do. He also felt that Kurt Bunch was trying to get him fired. He felt that Kurt Bunch was in contact with CHP Internal Affairs, had made some talk to Dombey and probably some other people, whoever it was, and been talking to some of the command at CHP also. Kurt Bunch had talked trash to his wife and his little girl. Kurt Bunch had been there prior, and he asked Kurt Bunch to do any interviews that he wanted to do at the station, not at his house. Quintanar wanted it to be done away from his home, and Kurt Bunch kept going to his house. Kurt Bunch had upset his wife. His wife was being told that by Kurt Bunch that Quintanar was going to be taken into custody. He's been lying to him, and he's going to be taken in custody for a homicide. He felt that the investigators wanted him to race home and fight with Kurt Bunch so they could arrest him. But Quintanar played it cool, contacted a sergeant. His wife had called him and said that told Kurt Bunch that she knew who he was and she didn't need to talk, and threw his card back in his face. 3/11 of 2015, around 9 a.m., I believe it was, there was a text to Fuentes. And Quintanar said he was going up the chain to see what the department does. He was looking for some support in the Department of in the CHP, and it looks like he got some. To me, it appears that he may have gotten some bad advice and not a lot of support. But said he is required to go up the chain of command as supposed to make notifications and things like this. That's exactly what he did. He also contacted his union rep, who was by the name of Mark Frost. I don't know if that's related to a lieutenant by the name of Frost. Is one of the chain of command that he had talked to. They talked about when Kurt Bunch had gone to his work, the station at the Modesto station, when Quintanar had transferred up to Modesto from Merced. Kurt Bunch had gone over to Modesto CHP station, and dispatcher told him that somebody was seen. Quintanar had told him who it was, and it was the investigator that went to his house, and the dispatcher said, "Oh, that clown." And dispatcher says, "Take off your gun and your badge and just go kick his ass." And but Quintanar said, "No, it's cool, man. I'll take care of it. It's no big deal." But they did call Kurt Bunch a clown and a tool, and that's where I think they got in trouble. Contempt of Bunch. There was others that in the office and stuff, and officers that were talking trash about Kurt Bunch too, and I'm sure that pissed him off. Jago Hill was asking about when the DA asked about the code of honor and all this stuff, but the proper way to talk to people and do things. But Kurt Bunch was just constantly making threats of taking him into custody on a homicide, and he said he didn't know anything about the homicide. He said that law enforcement's job is to protect people and property, and to protect people from oppression. Again, they talked about Kurt Bunch and the threats to arrest on the homicide charge. He felt intimidated by the threats, especially when he had gone and did what he did to his wife and his daughter. Jago Hill asked him about when the DA asked about the code of ethics and respect to rights of all persons. He says, as a police officer, every police officer is obligated to do that. And asking when he asked Daljeet Atwal if he was read his rights, that's what he was inquiring in, was that code of making sure everybody's treated properly. The constitutional right is to a lawyer, and the Fifth Amendment, the right to remain silent. It's not proper to intimidate anyone who is weak or oppressed. There's a certain wording in that goes with that. And he had regularly himself read his rights many times to in custody. He had taken into custody, like a drunk driver or whatever. It was no different than what he had asked Daljeet Atwal about his rights being read to him. He was just trying to be a friend to Daljeet Atwal. Jai Gohel had no further questions. There was a brief sidebar. Marlisa Ferrer had a couple of questions. Alonzo Granford had taken Quintanar outside for a conversation out in the quiet room, as they call it. Then Marlisa Ferreira started her redirect of Eddie Quintanar. And she kind of picked up right where she left off, doing a deposition. And she was talking about when a person is taken into custody, if they're have to be given their Miranda rights. And she said, it has to be done whether they're in custody or not. The in custody part is the questionable part. I'll tell you that right now, because they may have you in a room and tell you can leave any time, but they may not let you leave. Daljeet Atwal was there 5 or 6 hours, and I bet you they didn't just let him up and leave. So you're behind a bunch of locked doors. Even the door, the room you're in, may not be locked. When he asked Daljeet Atwal, he was asked him those questions about him being read his rights. When they were talking to him, he said he was being fair and trying to respectful to him about what he was a friend, and he was trying to make sure that everything went right. Kurt Bunch was not being fair and respectful when he came to his house, knowing full well that he was at work, and talked to his wife and tried to upset his wife. Quintanar made a choice to not talk to the chain of command. He had talked to several people in command. He'd gone up to I believe a captain, and he believes that he was told to not talk to them. One of the upper command read him the general order manual, or whatever they call it, their rules and regulations, but he didn't really give him an answer what he's supposed to do. He just, decide for yourself. Prior to going home to his house, his wife had called him on the cell to advise him of the visit of Kurt Bunch. He did not just race home. He got a sergeant and then went home. She asked him, Marlisa Ferrer asked him what was said by his wife, and he says, well, show me a transcript. And she says, well, was it recorded? She said it wasn't. I bet you Kurt Bunch's recorder was on. But apparently there's no official recording or transcript of the visit with Quintanar's wife. He did not recall what he told his wife, what they wanted to talk to him about, but he assumed it was in regard to Pop and Cork and this investigation that's been going on. Quintanar didn't tell his wife this is in regards to a missing person, a possible homicide case. He was trying to keep her from getting stressed out and getting too crazy about this. talked about in October of 2012 the internal affairs investigation or interview, or he calls it an interrogation, in regard to his guns at the Pop and Cork in October of 2012. They had information that his guns were at the Pop and Cork. There was also, they had the wiretaps. They had copies of the wiretaps, but everything there was nothing that they could prove that he actually did illegal, but it was improper for him to store his guns at somebody else's, in this case, a business. I guess it'd been improper at somebody else's house or something too. I don't know what their policy is. So the guns were registered, legal and registered to him. I believe he had 2 of them over there. I believe they're handguns. He told Officer Fuentes that Kurt Bunch was trying to get him fired. Apparently there were some things that he felt that Kurt Bunch was doing. And when I heard in the preliminary hearing, Quintanar's and McFarland's preliminary hearing, I heard testimony about from then Sergeant Dombey, who's now a lieutenant, but he was the internal affairs, and Kurt Bunch had been in contact with him. So who knows what was said, but it sounds to me like there was some activities going on in the background, probably with his chain of command too. He had said to others that Kurt Bunch wanted to talk about the internal affairs interview. That was a lie. He wasn't really telling everybody what was going on with Kurt Bunch. It's just something he's trying to keep himself, and Marlisa Ferreira is trying to keep it, turn it into something nefarious. And apparently Kurt Bunch at one point said that he had given turned the wiretaps over to CHP. Why would he do that? I think that's pretty clear why he would. Kurt Bunch never said anything to CHP in regards to the guns at Pop and Cork, or not admitting it anyway. So, but they probably got results of the search warrants, because I'm sure all the guns were inventoried. Not all the guns were confiscated, but they were inventoried, I'm sure. So that was all that Jai Gohel had. The jury went out for a little while. They had a couple of little things they wanted to talk about. When we came back in, Marlisa Ferreira was doing redirect again, and she asked him on cross. He was asked if the CHP ever, if he ever seen a retiree receive a plaque with a working gun, as a award for retiring, and he said he had. He said he'd seen that before. He was part of that group. I forget the name of the group. He wasn't part of the administrators of the group, but he was part of the group that did some of the things like that. Unknown if any protocols, if an officer were to, and only Marlisa Ferreira would think of this. She said if an officer would die, what happened to those guns? Only Marlisa Ferreira would ask a question like that. She asked him about Officer Dombey, if he knew that Officer Dombey was working on the investigation of the missing person and homicide of Corey Kaufman. He was not aware of that. He said Dombey was just working in internal affairs in Sacramento. But we saw an interesting interview in the prelim where Dombey and Steve, the Juice Jacobson, worked over Robert Woody pretty good, because he sat there for some time and just told him everything they knew instead of trying to gain information of what Robert Woody knew. Marlisa Ferreira asked him if he told, if Quintanar told anybody that Kurt Bunch had breached the code of honor. He said he didn't believe that he had. He said Kurt Bunch should have shown more respect and talked to Quintanar at the office. Marlisa Ferreira wanted to argue with him that she did go to the office, but that was after Kurt Bunch had belittled Quintanar's wife and little girl. And it kind of just made things worse instead of making things better. And I don't know why officers feel that they need to do that, but sometimes they do. He said, Quintanar said he made many arrests and knows when people were lying, like, say, in a drunk driver's case. Quintanar was actually not arrested by Kurt Bunch. He said he misspoke by that. It was a sheriff's office deputy that arrested him and took him to the sheriff's office. Kurt Bunch was at the office and had a few moments with him, but the interview was actually done by Frank Navarro. He had known Frank Navarro prior to both being law enforcement officers. They worked at a store, I think it was a grocery store or something together. Quintanar also said that he knew Corey Brown is the one that actually wrote the Ramey warrant. It wasn't Kurt Bunch. The first time that Kurt Bunch had come to his house in 2014, he told Kurt Bunch he had not talked to the Outlaws and since a search warrant on July 15th of 2012. He was told to not go there because of the issues with the guns and the concerns that he had about other things. Said he did talk to the Outlaws a few times after July 15th of 2012, and between July 15th of 2012 and 10/22 of 2012, and that's when he had the IA interview at CHP. There were several hundred texts between Daljeet Atwal and some calls to Daljeet Atwal and Baljeet Atwal. I believe the first time Kurt Bunch tried to talk to him was on June 16th of 2012, and he never called Kurt Bunch back. He also said that Kurt Bunch never called him, but he did leave some. He never talked to him on the phone, but Kurt Bunch did leave some messages, and he never called him back. He also left out the back door when Kurt Bunch called him to the office, and he had took off in his patrol car and went back to work. Told people he was getting harassed by Kurt Bunch. These are people that he didn't really want him into his business. He said that Kurt Bunch was trying to use the internal affairs investigation against him, and he sounds like he may have been. Marlisa Ferreira, it sounded like, was trying to get some character evidence in to make him look bad and trying to throw some mud on him and stuff. And I don't understand why. He's got immunity. He's not on trial here. I don't really see the information that she's trying to get out of him to go after him this hard. It just seems like a deposition because he's suing her personally and suing Kurt Bunch. And, the judge did ask about that because it was mentioned by Marlisa Ferreira. And Marlisa said she did know that Quintanar was suing Marlisa Ferreira and Kurt Bunch personally, but she said she has not read the suit, so she doesn't know what it says. She says the county counsel's office has the lawsuits and they're handling everything, so she hasn't even bothered to read it. Quintanar kept saying that he had nothing to do with the missing person or the homicide. She was asking if he had specific information from Daljeet Atwal in 2012. Objection. A lot of objections over that. It didn't do him any good. Judge was just going to let Marlisa do as she pleased. She asked him if he knew Daljeet was being followed and people were bugging him about the missing person from the Frank Carson property. He did not recall the call on 7/12/12 where some of that things were said. Refresh his transcript on that wiretap. It also said on the wiretap that they know it's because of Frank Carson. And the guy, the Dawgs Outlaw is saying the guy used to work for Turlock, and they were talking about Frank Navarro, who had gone to the sheriff's office, and I believe he was back with Turlock, but he was on the task force on this Corey Kaufman case, working with the DA's office. Marlisa Ferrer said he knew about the guns, the closed circuit TV, and that's in the back room, and after drinking, officers drinking at the hours of the store, and who worked what shifts. This is what Marlisa Ferrer was saying, that he knew that, and he's not being forthcoming about it. He knew the cars that the Outlaws drove, and he knew about the milk giveaways where they stopped on the way home from that one giveaway to talk to Corey Kaufman. It was either Kaufman or Cooley, I forget which one. She asked him if he was acting as a friend with Dawgs Outlaw on July 15, 2012. And he said he was trying to ensure his rights were protected as he would anybody. Marlisa Ferrer asked him if he was assisting the family of the missing person. Objection lit up the room when she asked that. She asked him if Kurt Bunch caused a scene or did his wife, and he went over and talked to her. Objection to that. But he said, Quintanar said, yes, he did cause a scene, but she's asking him, did your wife cause a scene? Well, Kurt Bunch is the one that showed up over there. His appearance is what caused the scene. Kurt Bunch's statements to his wife that he's a liar and going to be arrested is what Quintanar said. She asked him if he lied to Kurt Bunch about going to Poppencork. He said after the 15th, and after he was told not to, and he says, "No, ma'am, I didn't lie about that." She also asked him about Quintanar's first contact with Kurt Bunch, and he said he misspoke, and he never corrected it when he was told not to talk to. And then he said he was told not to talk to Kurt Bunch, so he was never ever to correct a statement about Scott McFarland that he attributed. Scott McFarland's neighbors were tweakers and they're stealing and stuff. But he related that to Dawgs Outlaw, but he never got to correct it because he never got to talk to Kurt Bunch again until he was arrested. And he was asked if he told Dombey it was Mark Frost, the union rep, that said to not talk to Kurt Bunch. And it was, and I remember hearing that wiretap. So that was the end of the day. Jury was sent out at 4:05. It seems like every week they want the courtroom shut down earlier and earlier. So the courtroom's got to shut down by 4:10 now, so they can get everybody out of the courthouse by 4:30. That was the end of the day. We're back tomorrow at the jury's coming back at 9:30. The attorney's coming in at 9 because they got some things they want to argue about and talk about and go over and whatever it is that they do. So that was it. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, back at 9 o'clock. Jury's in at 9:30. Don't forget my sponsors. We've got Merced Tile. People have been out of Merced. There's a video on my page with Merced Tile. They got some good stuff over there. They really do. You need to check it out if you're going to do some home repairs. It's good, affordable stuff. It really is. And they don't have cheap stuff over there, but it's affordable. Good stuff. So check it out. They got some nice stuff over there. I have a video of some of the stuff they have. They have some more stuff that he sent me. We're going to get that up as soon as I can. I'm just swamped with a lot of things right now. PayPal donations at the bottom of every post. The donations have been steady. I appreciate it. It pays the bills. It gets me buying transcripts. And sometimes, depending on circumstances, the transcripts are expensive. Somebody said I should get a transcript for that time I was off when I was sick. And I said, well, the last time I bought one, it was just for half a day, the afternoon session. It was $227. But sometimes they're cheaper than that, depending on the circumstances, and I'm not going to go into all of that. So sometimes they're expensive. And so we do what we can, and we're trying to get the information out. We're doing the best we can. If we're not there, we're not always able to get the transcript. Sometimes I will, sometimes I can't. So it is what it is. So that's all I got. Remember the PayPal buttons, and I appreciate all the support. There's a few people in court today. It was nice to see, and we need to see more people in there seeing what's going on. As I always say, don't take my word for it. Come to court and find out for yourself. Good night, everybody.